So it all started on February 19th. We were at a friend's house in Orlando for a birthday party. Well, you can tell he's really not feeling well. He's tired, he's cranky, he's whiny, his fever's pretty warm. So we go ahead and head home. That evening we go to bed about 2 o'clock in the morning. Noah wakes up vomiting, and it's nothing new. We've got kids and they've vomited before, so we just took care of him. And late that Monday night, I started feeling kind of uncomfortable with the way he was acting. Said, well, maybe this is a little bit more serious, so let's take him into the doctor in the morning. So Tuesday morning, Karina takes him to the pediatrician, and she runs a couple tests on him for strep and for flu and that kind of stuff. They all come back negative. She says, okay, it's just a stomach bug. We'll just ride it out. Tuesday, throughout the whole day, we can tell he's not breathing right. He's whimpering. He can't keep anything down no matter what we try. You have a little bit of comfort in the fact that the doctor looked at him this morning, but at the same time, you just get that gut feeling something's wrong. So we had him on the couch so that we can get to him quicker. It's closer to our room. And I'm laying in bed with the door wide open. I just finally got him settled down. I couldn't go to sleep. I knew that there was something wrong, that I had to do something. And so I told Karina, I said, listen, I'm going to take him into the emergency room, get him to at least get him an IV so he can get some fluids in him so his body can start calming down. At that point, we're still thinking it's just a stomach bug. For some reason, it was 2 o'clock before we were brought back. By that time, he and I are both wore out. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. He's 6 years old. He's toast. He's not feeling good. And at that point is when they start trying to get an IV in him. Everything started around 2:30 that morning, and it lasted for about 6.5 hours. So now you've got a 6-year-old who hasn't slept all night. They have noticed that there's something going on, a pneumonia-like symptom from an x-ray they did during the night. So they've got him on a nose cannula, which he doesn't like. He got some rest for about 30 minutes before people showed up for the transport. And the guys that showed up from Arnold Palmer were a breath of fresh air. These were super, super nice guys. Well, once we get to Arnold Palmer, Karina is able to meet us there. It's kind of hard to look at your son, when he looks back at you with those eyes of daddy, don't let him do it again, but you know that he needs the IV at the same time because his body's so extremely dehydrated. They come in, they finally get an IV into his arm using an ultrasound. In my mind, I'm going, you know what? This is the start of things getting better finally. And we have a doctor come in and starts talking to us about, issues with his breathing and the possibility of a breathing tube. He was still on the nose cannula at that time and watching his oxygen levels go up and down. I'm no doctor. I'm thinking he's just extremely tired and he needs some good rest, and then he'll be fine because he's starting to kind of act up and stuff. Well, he's 6 years old and he hadn't slept, so I wrote it off to that. Well, over the course of the next couple of hours, we can tell that it's getting worse. His oxygen levels keep depleting, and we had a great doctor, a very seasoned doctor, and he says, well, he can be down anywhere from 3 days to 3 weeks. And we're like, immediately, we're like, no, it's not going to happen. Over the course of about an hour and a half, he keeps going down and gets to the point where he's completely acting up, which is not normal for Noah. He's a good kid. Little did we know, we found this out afterwards, the carbon dioxide levels in his body were increasing so much that we eventually got to the point where his body went completely limp. Was a scary, scary moment. I wanted to say the scariest because we didn't know what was coming, but it was up to that point, it was the scariest moment as a father to watch your child go completely limp. And they crank the oxygen levels on full, the highest flow they can put, and 100% oxygen saturation. And the doctor looks at me and says, we got to do it. And I look at Karina and I'm like, we have to. We have no choice. We signed the papers for them to put him on a breathing tube, knowing that it could be 3 days to 3 weeks that we wouldn't be able to talk to our son. And so they asked us to leave the room so they can put it in, and we did. And it was about 45 minutes. We walked down into the hall. There's this big bay window, and we sat there and just cried on each other's shoulders and prayed. And at the end of that, the entourage starts walking down the hall to talk to us, all the doctors and nurses. And the doctor comes up and starts using all these scary words like cancer and leukemia tests that they were going to run on him because they didn't know exactly what was going on. And something rose up inside of me, and I looked at this doctor and I said, listen, I'm a man of faith. I said, you're not going to find anything wrong with my son, and we're going to leave this hospital. And he looks at me and says, Well, he said, I'm not a religious man. He said, but I've been doing this long enough to know that I only have about 10% control and God's got 90, so okay. We know what the Bible says about the power of life and death in the tongue, and I think that's what rose up was the fact that my spirit was listening to this guy speak death over my child, and we weren't going to have it. And so that was the first moment, the first time of Noah's testimony that we had to begin standing in faith. I walk in there, and there's my perfect little boy, he's 6 years old, basically in an induced coma, so that the breathing tube could work for him and not allow his body to suffer anymore. And then what we begin to learn as they ran some blood tests, because they had finally been able to get some blood when they got the IV in, was that his kidneys were suffering. They began to bring in a specialist about his kidneys. So now it's already bad enough that he's under on a breathing tube, but now you're telling me his kidneys are shutting down. So now when you walk into the room, you've got the breathing machines going off, you've got all these different medications they've got him on, all the different monitors and beeps, and now this giant dialysis machine sitting at his foot, and my son is completely lifeless. You know, as you get later on it at night, fear is a hard thing to fight. And when I tell you fighting off fear, we had a great friend of ours, Mindy, who sent me a video from Elevation Church called I Can Handle It. Every morning I literally had to put my headphones on and play that video 2 or 3 times to get out of bed. I didn't even know who I was at that time, because here was a new side of me that couldn't even function without getting fired up on some Jesus and able to get out of bed in the morning. And then I'd do great throughout the day, and then come nighttime, it would get tough again as I got tired. And every doctor that came in, it was the same thing. Listen, you're not going to find anything wrong with him, and we're going to leave this hospital. And they brought in the Center for Infectious Disease Control because, you know, he was a new case. They didn't know what was going on. They needed to run some special tests, and so that this guy came in, and I would tell him the same thing. And they all look at you the same way, like, oh, you're cute, you know. But we were standing on that. We were standing on the fact that there was going to be nothing wrong. And that was hard. I'm not going to, you know, people come back afterwards and were like, y'all were such an inspiration on how strong you were. You know, you saw the front. You didn't see the struggle that went in our hearts and minds, because to be able to stand on that with things, it's like standing on the end of a needle and things constantly trying to knock you off of that small point that you're standing on. That's the way it felt, because we'd never had to stand in faith for anything that extreme. This was new grounds, new waters that we didn't know what to do, so all we did was stand on God's word. On the 4th day of him being under, the doctor we had that day she had an agenda. And her agenda was to bring me to her reality. And so she said some words that may not sound extreme now in this video, but when you're sitting there and watching your son fight for his life, it was tough. She said, you know, your son is very sick. He's probably the sickest kid in the ICU right now, and he's in very critical condition. I know my son's critical, but that was the last thing in the world I needed to hear at that point. It was about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. I'm dead tired from fighting all day, fighting fear. That night, I laid down on this hard bed that they give you, and I prayed for God to knock me out. I literally laid down on my hands, face down like this. And I'm 30 minutes of just fighting off fear, fighting off fear, fighting off fear. And I just tell God, please knock me out. I know I can be better in the morning. I'll listen to my videos. It'll get me fired up, and I'll be able to go through another day. But I can't handle this anymore, and so I need you to knock me out. And I did finally fall asleep, woke up the next day and started it again. So I'm walking next door to Ronald McDonald House that evening, the 5th night. And it's hard, because what I learned at that point is my faith level up to that point had been on God, but also on the monitors. If I could look up, if I could wake up in the middle of the night scared and look up at the monitors and see that his oxygen levels were decent, then I was okay. My faith level was restored, but it was based on what I saw. And so here I am for the first time walking next door to sleep. My kids, as they've grown up, when they've had levels of fear on something, I would do trust exercises to work them out of that. My son had a fear of water. We worked on that. My daughter had a fear of heights. And I truly believe that fear is a huge handicap. It's a huge handcuff to God, because fear stops him from being able to do what he wants to do in our lives. And so I would instill that in my kids from a very young age. And here I was walking back, and God reminds me of that with my kids. And he goes, "Hey, David, you do trust exercises with your kids. How about I do one with you? I've got your son tonight. You go to sleep and trust me." And that was exactly what I needed to hear. Karina knew I was dead tired, and so we swapped as long as Gianna, our 3-month-old, would sleep, because we were breastfeeding at the time. And so I went in and slept for a few hours, and Karina stayed with Noah. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, he started suffering, and his oxygen saturation started dropping. And so Karina cranks up our little Bluetooth speaker with some worship on, and she belts it out and basically sends those demons that were trying to attack our kid running. Well, that Saturday, which now would be his 10th day in, we actually had Alexa's first soccer game, and so we headed headed home, which is about an hour away, and watched her play her game. Well, about 3/4 away through the soccer game, I get a phone call from the hospital. And so she says, "Everything's fine, and I wanted to give you some good news." And so, I'm figuring on something beginning to turn around and things get better. She's like, "The breathing tube is out, and he's waking up." What? We were not expecting that for at least another couple of days, according to the doctor. I get there, and sure enough, there's my little boy with his eyes open. I can't tell you what that felt like to be able to see his eyes open and see him blink a little bit. I asked him if he wanted to listen to some worship. I said, "Do you want to listen to Toby Mac? Packing My Bags" is what he calls it, the song. And I could see a little difference in his eyes. I'm like, "If you want to listen to it, raise your eyebrows." And it was the most incredible thing in the world. So now this kid who hasn't been moving for a week and a half, his little eyebrows are dancing up and down. It was the most awesome thing. Tears came to my eyes. I was so excited. Here he was, some life in my son for the first time in a week and a half. And it was a breath of fresh air. So of course we blared that song and jammed it out. And that Wednesday was a hard day. That entire day, when he would fall asleep, his oxygen saturations would drop to about 85. And they're not supposed to go below 90 per the doctor at that point. And so we'd have to wake him up, and his oxygen saturations would go up to 92 or 93. This is while having a high flow cannula in. I believe it was 20 liters, which was the max they could give him, and 100% oxygen saturation. And he's not getting above like 93. Still don't know what's going on with his lungs. They're still constantly running tests. And so the whole day was 5 minutes of sleep for him, dropped to 85%, wake him up, goes up to 92 or 93. He's 6 years old. He's tired. He's got tubes all over the place. By this time on Wednesday, he's getting some functionality in his arm, so he's trying to grab for things, and I was at the end of my rope, because there was nothing I can do to help him. I couldn't leave because Karina was next door with our 3-month-old, and I was so dead tired. If she started screaming and crying at me, I couldn't handle it. And so I was stuck in a situation that I felt I could not handle, and I had nowhere to go. And that night, we had a friend coming over to play worship, and I was so tired I almost just said, "Don't come," but something inside me told me, "You need to do this." And so our friends Amy and Fee came over, made the hour drive to come play some worship. I forget what the first worship song was. We played one worship song, but then we played "Good, Good Father." And if you've ever had a moment where an entire picture gets painted for you in a split second, that's what happened when she started playing "Good, Good Father." I realized that I was going to have to lay my everything down and believe that God was big enough to handle my son in spite of everything that I saw. And to be in a type A personality, to lose complete control over the situation and let him have it. To worship him through the storm, through the pain, through everything that I was going through. That happened in a split second, ran through my head. Then we get to the bridge, and it says, "You're perfect in all of your ways." And I'm looking at my 6-year-old son, who's asleep at the moment. With all this stuff going on, everything we've gone through now for the past 2 weeks. And I lose it. I just can't take it. And my spirit rises up and says, "You need to go talk to the spirit inside the kid." The kid's only 6 years old, but the Spirit of God that's inside of him is as old as God is. I walk over to him, and I lean over into his ear, and I start speaking to the Spirit. I'm telling it things like, "It's your time to stand up. It's your turn to be strong and to force this thing out. We can only pray from the outside, and our faith is here, but you need to stand up and push this thing out. You were healed the day that Christ died. You are healed, and you need to shove this junk out of you." I go sit back down, and we finish that song and one more. His oxygen saturations are at 100%, and he's asleep. Soundly asleep. He looks like he's actually resting. Well, that was Wednesday. It would have been Monday. We leave the ICU and go straight to a regular room where we stay for 2 days and then go home.
Tell mommy hi.
Hi.
Say, "I sat up all by myself."
I set up all my myself.
Woohoo! And say, "I'm going home."
I'm going home.
Woohoo!
Woohoo.
Can you show her your muscles?
Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed Noah's testimony. We do not give Noah's testimony as a rah-rah yay for us. This is nothing for us. In ourselves, we can do nothing. This was all for glory for God. And the way God's going to get glory, the way we're going to punch the devil in his teeth, make him swallow his teeth, is that if this testimony instills faith inside of you, and if you help share this so others can have that faith as well. Because the Bible is kind of like a book of mathematical equations. It says if we do A plus B, it'll equal C. For us, A was standing in faith, and B was laying our hands on our son and believing he was healed when we did that. And then C equals his healing. For you, it may be something relationally. It may be something financially. I don't know what's going on in your life. But the equation does not change. The power of life and death is in the tongue. Are you speaking life over your situation? Are you speaking death? Are you believing that God's going to get glory in a situation? Or do you believe that He's just going to allow you to settle for second best? I do not believe that that's the God that we serve. In fact, I know it's not. God did not die. He did not send Jesus to die for us to get second best. He sent Jesus to die so we can have the most incredible life possible. Believe what you will. This is the way I believe it. God put handcuffs on Himself when He gave us His word, because He said if we do what He told us to do, He has to come through. Well, I don't know if it's God's will for this person to be healed. It is God's will that none should perish. When Jesus died on the cross, He wasn't looking for a person to die as a martyr following His death to bring more glory to Him. He did all that was necessary to bring glory to Him and His kingdom when He died on the cross and shed His blood for you to be healed, for you to be financially free, for you to have that perfect relationship with the person. Whatever situation you're going through has already been won according to God's side. The only side of the equation that has not been fulfilled yet, if you're going through it still, is your side and my side. It is our job to stand in faith until it happens. The Bible says that we win through the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. So I hope you've enjoyed Noah's testimony.
The feeling of being sick and tired,
A choice to sit in it or to get better.
The most important thing that you have to realize is you've got to realize in your heart that you're worth it.